Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be. Thank you for joining me. My name is Chris Hewer, and I'm here to talk to you about the TeamFlow Institute, which we've recently launched. And today's topic is creating the conditions for TeamFlow, achieving maximum momentum in a remote world. Now, I should say up front that the idea is actually TeamFlow creates maximum momentum in any world, as these principles are, how do we improve our collaborative efficiency, our effectiveness? I'm really hesitant to keep saying collaborative productivity as much as I've leaned on that over the last 10 years or so, because we believe that productivity isn't the right measure for the sort of human work that we're doing now. And so there's a lot of different things we're exploring and researching and trying to identify. I'm thinking that it might end up being progression instead of productivity. But we still have a lot to do before we land on something and many more conversations. So that's why we want to share these thoughts and get out there. This webinar is part of the Summer of Flow 2023, going on through the end of August, right before Labor Day. And then I've got some special stuff coming out the week of Labor Day. We're going to cover all the basics of TeamFlow. We have office hours on Thursdays at 8 a.m., which, by the way, Denise, we're probably going to switch over and just do in Zoom. So that'll hopefully be easier. And so Thursday morning at 8 a.m. And really what we're looking for is team leaders, of course, managers, and anyone interested in improving the performance of their teams. But I'm also interested in speaking to COOs about the broader architecture and strategy and implications that actually ends up affecting the entire organization in some material ways, and that end up being really about resetting some of the mission, vision, and values of organizations to be able to make it more truth or more accurate to the reality, the lived truth of the people inside the organizations. And if it turns out that that lived truth isn't what they really want, then that's time for looking at another type of change management program, which is going to be hard. But I really believe that we have gone through this digital transformation period, and people are still starting digital transformations, and we didn't do the human transformation necessary to go along with it. You know, as one of our central principles at TeamFlow Institute, and the failure of remote work in particular, we see as a result of changing where we work, not how. But let's go in a little bit further now. Who are we? Because it's kind of an amoebus thing for many people, and totally understandable. We're a research institute, we're an academy for education, we're a lab for experimentation, and then we're a community of practice for augmented collaboration. And ultimately, in the long term, what we're building here is a professional services guild, not firm, of strategists, change agents, and ultimately TeamFlow facilitators. And in fact, that's one of our core missions, is to stand up, define, and educate this new role of TeamFlow facilitation that enables the participants, the managers, and other people, the contributors, to get more done with essentially an effective collaboration coach. And so we'll see how that naming evolves over time, but that's kind of the gist of our existence and where we're headed. Last week, which you can find in our blog over at teamflow.institute, we went into a webinar on the power of TeamFlow to introduce the concept and some of the benefits, the values of achieving a state of TeamFlow, and of course went deeper into the role of TeamFlow facilitator and some of these other topics I just mentioned briefly. But that's not the focus today. Well, it is, but from a different angle. So before I get into the whole thing, for the benefit of those of you who haven't seen it before, I'm briefly going to touch on what is flow. And flow, I finally have found this out, thank goodness, for another thing Google search is still good for, which is being able to pronounce people's names. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is the author of a book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And it's something that a lot of people have read about perhaps over the years, but not necessarily read. But it's the idea of that peak state of performance for an individual that we reach, where we're in the zone. You can talk about Satori when you're running as another kind of example of that as a flow state. Of course, when you're painting, or when, like me yesterday, finally getting into the writing of this deck, where it was 8 hours without a break and not even recognizing it because I was so focused and it was all there and I was just tapping into it and getting to go it. And so we're looking at how do we achieve that state amongst a group of people. And that's a little bit more complicated. And it does first require people to understand and personally experience what a state of flow is, so they can understand the fulfillment, the sense of joy that comes with it, the sense of effectiveness, the sense of self-worth, and all the other components of it. But it turns out that we didn't just make this up. There's a ton of research out there on team flow. I'm sharing with you here, one of our leading researchers has written 4 major academic research papers on this, is his model for explaining it. And so just like it is for an individual, it's that state of focus and collaboration where teammates are engaged fully in a task at hand. And if we actually create the conditions that lead to it, we believe that is how we really unlock the true value potential of the organization and your people. Now, this isn't for every kind of team. I am right now leaning on the idea of for those people who do human work. And we've got to define that a little bit better, I know, but Seth Godin in his book, Song of Significance, does a really good job at it. And I'm working on how do I kind of explain it his way and pull in some of the other stuff, and we'll have more there in the near future. But let me just share and explain the diagram here so that it's not overly confusing. In essence, the heart of what we're seeking is collective ambition. Now, when I did my startup Aligned back in 13 to 15, I was looking at the idea of alignment and that we need to get everyone on the same page, literally. And so I built things like one-page plans and other fun tools like that. But it didn't really take off because I looked at it more from the angle of that upper left, that what people were doing were breaking their commitments because they weren't aware of their commitments, because they weren't managing their commitments. So back then we leaned on, I'm sorry, my mouse moved. We leaned on the work of Fernando Flores and Terry Winogard, and they had created something similar basically in the 80s and 90s, talking about these sorts of principles and the need for them. Also something I discovered afterwards, and what it came down to is people don't want to make commitments. They don't want to be responsible to others, and there's some really interesting things there, but that's a matter of context and power of language. And why I really love what Jeff did with this is collective ambition instead of alignment is the driving purpose, like we were talking about before we started this webinar, is that thing that like, I want to get this done. And having everyone aligned to, I want to get this done, is that alignment of the individual and team and organizational goals. And then of course, what we need to be able to get there is a focus on understanding all of the things that matter, a unity of our team, a sense of progress being visible to us so that we know we're actually achieving what we're set out to do. And of course, the mutual trust that is what comes from having psychological safety, that comes from working out loud and having open communication. But there's another really killer corner or foundational element to this, which is high skill integration. And it's more than just the ability to develop what in team science is talked about as team intelligence, about how if we add one person with the right skill, the right attitude, the right perspective, we can actually exponentially grow a team's intelligence. It's not IQ at all, actually. But the idea being is that it's not, there's something there that that person brings, a je ne sais quoi, if you will. There's an element, there's something that's missing in the team that that person brings in, and literally their presence is something that transforms it. And that's when we're going to get later on, not today, but into the hiring and onboarding process in a little more detail about hiring for purpose instead of hiring for high skill. Hiring for that alignment with the mission, vision, and values of the organization, with the understanding of the industry or the work that you need to do, with an understanding of the language. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But beyond that, there's one other thing that he really hits on that I really, really appreciate. And that is high skill integration. I'm sorry, I looked at my scat instead of thinking about what I was saying. And that is actually the blending of egos. How do we all get along? And literally that's where I started, thinking about this some 25 years ago, where I realized as we were moving when I was a child, and I saw us moving into the service economy in the early 70s and moving into the information economy in the mid to late 80s, moving into what I've called the knowledge economy over the last 25 years, is how do we get smart people to work better together? And that, to me, is how we unlock the maximum amount of value we can create. Because if you and I and the other people we need figure out how to get along, then we can actually end up producing more value together. We can have a better time at it, of course. And that's what the basis is that really leads to the psychological safety, the trust, the ability to bring in radical candor and transparency behind it. So we're going to be actually including his 4 white papers in the course that we're offering in the fall. And also, I believe, although it hasn't been finalized, Jeff will be at least a guest lecturer at one of those, if not more, as we continue our conversations. So I kind of previewed this one a little bit already. I actually knew that was coming up, so that's why I actually went into it. But it is more than alignment. It is that depth that we talked about. I just wanted to share a couple of examples of this so I could, kind of express the intent. The Amish barn raising, this is a video, by the way. If you search for it, you'll see the video of they stood, other than the foundation where the bricks have been laid, they stood up all the wood on this Amish barn between 7 a.m. and I believe around 6 p.m. with a good 90-minute break for lunch. I read the recipe for feeding an Amish barn raising, and it's something like 115 lemon pies, 200, it's a massive amount of people. You can only see maybe 80 people in here, and you can't even see them all, but that's a collective ambition for a shared benefit. Now, I actually worked on this and a couple other slides after dinner break where I saw Rainn Wilson's new documentary or whatever show on CNN, Searching for Happiness. And he happened to be over in Ghana and talking to a fisherman. And he went out on a boat with the fisherman and scared for his life. And it was very funny to watch, everything else, rough seas and all that. But when he was talking to him and finding out more, he introduced him to this word Norbois. It's N-O-R-B-O-A. It's very hard to find things online about it. I spent half an hour, so I know. But it is real, and it means togetherness. It is that sense of unity that I believe the Amish represent here as well, that we are all in this together, and that things that we do are for our collective benefit. Of course, this is also more of an Eastern thing than a Western thing with our wheat-based agriculture society versus a rice-based agriculture society over in the East. But I believe that more and more people are seeing the possibilities if we are able to actually have this mutual ambition and the collective ambition for a shared benefit. We also see that with bees and how they instinctively know how to look after the queen bee, how to actually close down a hive and go start a new one, and how they go and a few hundred or whatever seek out a new location and start building, and they prepare everything, and then at some point they all just leave for the new place and they set up for their new queen bee to arrive, as this queen bee is going to die. But it's an amazing other example of collective ambition. And again, it's a story Seth Godin tells inside of Song of Significance that I'm going to need to learn to tell better. Another one, of course, one of the first places where I saw this was actually looking at restaurant and bar crews. When you can tell the difference when you get into a restaurant, and every server is there to support the server that you've been assigned. Where they pull their tips. They have that sort of shared benefit of if this person gets a better service, I'm going to get a better tip. And it's very well understood. And somehow those managers are able to shape those people together in a team and to have that sense of unity and that sort of collective ambition to provide a stellar experience for their customers. And really, I really hit on this very closely. I worked with a client who was in the what do they call it? I'm trying to think of the proper word. I can't. It's the liquor to lips business is how it's referred to in the adult beverage marketing circles. But where they send people out to the restaurants to do sampling of shots or wines or set up the table in the Costco or in the Total Wine or what have you, all of those programs. Well, a lot of those programs involve multiple restaurants and bars showing up doing these promotions. They run massive campaigns to launch new liquor brands and what have you. to, and also new non-alcoholic liquor brands, right? Which is really fascinating. There's a whole other space there. One of my friends started a company called Liars, which is amazing how it's growing. And they have a similar need. But when they do that, they go and they look for people who are individuals. Now, to just go ahead and staff that booth at Total Wine and Pour, they've got a training program of some kind of sort, but what they don't have is team training. What they don't have is the ability so that the 4 or 5 people who are on a given shift, on a given campaign, who are on a given campaign, can back each other up if one of them can't make it. They're all independents, and so they don't have that. So when we looked at that model, I realized that the thing to do, instead of going into a market to try to hire like this individual, that individual, that individual, what we needed to do was find restaurants who had a great front of house crew that we could actually hire them together, who already have each other's backs, have that trust and have that relationship built, that we can build on top of that and therefore produce a better program. So that I thought was very important. And of course, back of the house too. And then, of course, as we look to the insect world, once again, ants are a perfect example of how they do this. This is one of those things where they're just helping each other across to get their survival or get to the food. And of course, they have scouting parties and so many other things. But these are individual actions for a collective ambition leading to a shared benefit, in this case here being survival. And one of the things Rain said really made me think, because he was looking at this idea of Norwa in Ghana and came up with the realization and basically said, what if our shared ambitions, he didn't use that exact words, what if that was happiness? Like, how would that be different if we as a society or a community or a town? And I said, you know what, that's the same thing we're talking about here as a team. What if our mutual ambitions were happiness, growth, dignity, freedom, autonomy, community, curiosity, and security? Now, if you notice, freedom and security, I have all my life for some reason embraced the freedom thing and have eschewed security a little too often. But that's a whole nother story for a different day. But I know internally what that means to me, that I have made choices that allow me to risk it all, thankfully, because my situation allows for it. But many people can't. We need that security. And ultimately, what we all need is a balance of some measure of it. And whether we turn the equalizer dial all the way one way or the other, that doesn't matter. What matters is that we all need that imbalance. We all need to feel that sense of freedom, the autonomy to do what we think is correct, the agency to do what we want with our lives for the path that we want to do, we want to take, without judgment. And so I've been very fortunate to live that life, to choose clients, to fire clients, to take on projects with nonprofits or community organizations that take up a lot of my time because I care about it, because it's a personal passion, because it's a social impact issue for me, and because the work itself gives me satisfaction, even when I'm not getting money. So that's been very fortunate for me, and I'd love more people to have that sort of opportunity. And I see the world that we're entering in as one in which more people can do that. And that's another kind of personal reason behind the establishment of the Team Flow Institute. So let's switch over into the conditions. And some of this stuff has obviously been previewed already. We have to talk about it. I'm sorry, I left a little dangling code there on the right. That's for joining as a professional member, but that's not what I'm promoting today. Apologies for that. So what I realized as I was setting this up is that I needed to really better explain what we're talking about during the course of this presentation. I'm sorry, I just lost my window. There we go. Is it still up? Yes, okay. Cool. Sorry about that. Okay. So what we're going to go through here, and I've got a lot of stuff. So this is where, Denise, I'd love your interactive input if you could help me with this. As we'll get into it, you'll see I have a lot of items in each list under each of these 3 areas. And I'm going to talk about a couple. And then if there's a couple more that you'd like to talk about, or Karen, you as well, please raise the issue and I'm happy to speak to each of them. But there's way too many to go through today. This is really iteration number 1 of this presentation and of these materials. So it's a little more comprehensive than it's going to be in a month or so. But the prerequisites are the necessary foundation, the conditions, the ongoing environmental factors that people experience on a regular basis. And then there is, what are the tactics, actions, and interventions we take to create those conditions? And so we're going to go through that here a little bit now. The prerequisites, as I really kind of mentioned earlier, but I didn't emphasize very well, the prerequisite really is a safe space that people can feel they can be themselves, that they can speak up, that they know how to speak up. Of course, that requires some other things with that individual being prepared and able to do that with a high degree of EQ and self-awareness and et cetera. But the prerequisites we're talking about now are really organizational. And really comes back to, looking at this diagram that Jeff Vandenhout did in many ways. How do we get to that mutual, how do we take our mutual commitments, our clear goals, our alignment of our personal goals, our high skill integration, put that into an environment where we can have psychological safety and one that reinforces and continuously builds trust. And then, of course, we start leading to some of the conditions that actually create that from here. So this is where it's really a challenge, perhaps, for organizations to go through this change, but very easy for a team to actually adopt these principles, right? We don't have to change everyone to start trying out some of these techniques, some of these protocols, some of these programs that we're suggesting that are all fundamental in building the team flow. We have to start where we are, which also means we need to start with knowing where we are, which we'll get to in a minute. But the reason why I'm emphasizing this about the difficulties for an existing organization is because it involves change management. And no one likes change. And everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people enjoy the status quo. A lot of people want to defend the status quo because they perceive it, or it really is, distinctive benefit to them, perhaps separate of others. But the idea of revisiting our mission, vision, and values, and actually looking at how do we create a balanced organization as a whole is the long-term key to making this all work. In the short term, it's about understanding what do we want, where are we at, how do we get there, which is, sadly, consulting 101. It still is. There's no other way to really describe that. And trust me, I tried because I didn't want to use the same language, but that is the way. We've got to understand where we're at. We got to choose where we want to go, and then we got to find a path to get there. Simplest way of looking at it. And so the path to create team flow is what I'm saying doesn't need to go through all of that. But the small things we do and think about and how we change our attitudes and how we change our protocols and how we change what we measure and some of the other fundamental policies and stuff that we can change one at a time, those small movements are going to lead us to that long-term position of a truly invaluable organization where the people feel fulfilled, that they are contributing in a meaningful way, and it does exist. It doesn't exist often in nature. That's the problem to it. Seth Godin, again, in Song of Significance, he puts it this way. What if your organization could provide all of its employees with the best job they ever had? And that becomes the aspirational sort of collective ambition for us. How do we help more organizations provide their employees, and I might also include a little bit more broadly stakeholders, their contractors, their families of their employees, the communities in which they live, the industries in which they work. How do we do that for the broader group of stakeholders as well? And it's possible. It's just going to take a while, which is also why I'm really excited to be working with a couple of startups right now where we're doing all of this stuff from the blank page of building the organization. Actually, I'm sorry, you want me to pause there really quick? Denise, do you want to ask any questions before I go forward on this?
No, I'm good. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Karen, you can also add in the chat if you want to do that, although I'm not seeing it right now, but I'll pay attention. The conditions, how do we set conditions so that people can rise above the maze of bureaucracy and the labyrinth of getting things done inside of an organization? this is a long list. I'm letting you read a little bit, and I'm going to pick out a few of these that I really want to talk about more. A couple of them are kind of related. Win-win-win and co-elevation are certainly related in some other ways. But, how do we get to an organization or a team where everyone is self-aware and has awareness of the others? This doesn't mean intimate details and understanding like Crystal knows the personalized email communications technology might do, but at least to understand like this is what that person cares about. Now I'm going to take this back up to a couple of the other elements that are really the actions for it, or maybe it's down, which is where the power of OKRs, for me at least, or some similar sort of transparent objective system of what are we trying to accomplish strategically, and key results, the measure of how we know that we did it successfully or how well we did in achieving our objective, comes into play here as well. So by having that open, we will have an awareness of what other people have committed to do for the team and the organization through their personal commitments to the OKRs. So before we even pick up the phone to run an idea by somebody in another group or another team or another department or even our own team, we can look and understand that right now they're working on this. Right now they are tasked with and are committed to delivering this to the organization. That is for our shared benefit. How do I help them to achieve that? And I can filter myself if the idea that I'm bringing to them or the program or whatever isn't in service of accomplishing that objective or delivering on those measurements that they're measured by for their success, it's probably going to be lower on their priority list of something to consider. And of course, there's 100 other ways that comes to play in working out loud. And again, we'll talk more about that later. But also in terms of the self, of course, some kind of degree of curiosity. How do we encourage curiosity? Well, we do it by setting up programs based on questions, based on understanding that every idea we have isn't necessarily exactly right in what we're going to do, but it's an hypothesis in service of those objectives and key results. It's a hypothesis in making the sales and making the progression with our product and doing all the different things that we're trying to accomplish in our business or organization. And so really powerful. And again, as we were discussing earlier with AI, the search literacy and the questions that we would ask of search engines, now we have to become even more eloquent and detailed in how we ask them of AI. So developing that curiosity and developing skills around powering questions, that ends up being an actual tactic and intervention, if you will, but it is also something that we can create culturally around everyone. Then, we've got some other elements, radical candor. Can we actually feel safe enough to provide constructive criticism for something that really doesn't look right? How do we actually, deal with those difficult conversations, not just the easy ones of attaboys and wow, what a great job you just did on this and you deserve a bonus and wow, you really improved your skills, which is another big part of it overall. But how do we actually get to that spot where we can have those difficult conversations and we know how to? That's actually one element that we believe the TeamFlow facilitator is going to serve, because in my experience so far, and whatever number of decades I've been here, 2 to 3 years in business life, it's something that people in the moment, knowledge workers, service workers, every kind of worker, they're not able to bring in. And just like a performing arts troupe or a sports team or a ballet or a restaurant crew, they need coaching to get through that. And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. One of the problems with separating this into 3 things, obviously, is the interplay of all of them. And my apologies for not having that crisp yet. That's something we're going to be working on and defining better. Another reason why I went with the big list instead of trying to define which ones were really most important. A couple other things I mentioned before, shared language. I didn't get to role clarity per se, but that's actually a huge problem in most organizations. We have to, as leaders, invest more time in defining the parameters of a given role and what's expected from an individual. And if we can do that, the next stage above that is actually looking at the idea of position agreements and how an individual position agreement, which is a think of a job description with everything somebody would need to know, including who they worked with, how they got certain inputs to get their work done, who they were expected to deliver it to, and essentially a map of all the workflow. And so that's a big part of what we're trying to work through here, is creating the infrastructure in which we can create that sort of environment where people can act with that sort of intensity and intentionality to get things done, because they know exactly what's expected of them. They know where they fit in the organization. They know what they need to contribute. And of course, more deeply, in order to get to that trust and that sort of safety, we need to feel connected to each other in some way. And right now, as I see it in a lot of meetings that I've joined for other companies and elsewhere, and we did it here today too, and it's totally fine. But we spent 10 minutes just kind of talking about whatever, getting to know each other, catching up, and all that other stuff. And if at the meeting was 100 people here, and we ended up spending 10 minutes on that, that's 1,000 minutes. That ends up being about what, 14, 18, about 19 hours, right? About 19 hours, somewhere right around there, or 18 or something. Sorry, my math is off this morning. But the point being, that's just time that's burnt for all these people having to sit around paying attention, just like we bring too many people to meetings. So there's another part of that in terms of meeting culture, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But how do we actually make that culture more collaborative? Now, there's a bunch of other stuff in here I could talk about, but I do want to talk about one in particular because it was a big one for me personally, and that is co-elevation. And the idea of adopting an abundance over scarcity kind of mindset, and looking to create win-win-wins, wins for our organization, wins for ourselves as managers and team leaders, and wins for our people. And of course, we could extend that a few ways outward to the other stakeholder groups, but I really want to focus on our internal collaborative teams. Whatever the status of their employment, whatever the status of their legal arrangement with the organization. It doesn't matter necessarily, it shouldn't, if somebody is an independent contractor or if they're part of the team, other than perhaps some disclosure sorts of elements and what can they get access to. But co-elevation, I have been thinking about this my whole life. Every organization I've started has something to do around this. It's a core principle that I believe that if you're better off, I'm better off. I feel the same thing most days with service workers. Some days they push me a little bit because they're having a bad day, and it's really hard to try to be nice when they're having a bad day and pushing it on us. But, I continue to try to be in that mindset that, hence over tipping and all these other things that I've done over the years, just trying to make sure that our community thrives and does this together. But it turns out co-elevation is actually a concept, and it's from it's been talked about a bunch of circles, but the most famous, I think, so far is one of my former Deloitte colleagues who I didn't know, Keith Ferrazzi, and his book, Leading Without Authority, in which he lays out the principles of co-elevation and then how to actually make it real inside the organization using a variety of techniques, including his main one, which is a relationship action plan, about how do we make our interest in particular people who may not be a part of our direct team who we work with every day, but are part of another team that's essential input or output for us to be able to be successful, who doesn't necessarily have the same measures of success that we have. So what is it that we can do to help them be more successful? And I'm reminded of a story that I can't tell. So I just realized I can't tell it, so I'm not going to tell that one. But the point being is that, when you actually care about people who aren't necessarily, the person that has to write your check or has to give you the research that you need in order to finish your work or whatever it might be, there are a lot of other role players and other teams and other parts of the organization. And the point is that we need to adopt this strategy of co-elevation. How can I make them better? What can I do to help them succeed? And to have that as sort of a mutual philosophy across the company, this requires the behavioral changes perhaps of leadership to model those sorts of behaviors. And it comes through again in all of our shared language. So we actually start adopting that language, and that becomes our inside baseball acronym soup, our certain phrase that we use and that ends up representing how we care about each other and what we do together. Obviously, a lot more to talk about here, but for time reasons, I want to go ahead and switch on. Denise, do you have any questions on anything in particular that you don't recognize or want more info on?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, two things really quick as I realize. Results-oriented work environment is from these women who worked at Best Buy. Really fabulous book. I really enjoyed it a lot, and they did a terrific job when they implemented that at Best Buy. And then, of course, leadership changed and it fell apart a little bit. But the book itself is still good ideas, and so I encourage you to look at it. On self-management, this comes out of Morningstar, the tomato farm grocery. What do? Sausages, they do all that stuff. So you see them in the grocery store all the time. That's the management practice that they adapted, and then they stood up the Self-Management Institute to teach these principles to others. And Doug Kirkpatrick they stood down the organization a couple of years ago, sadly. So I'm trying to get all of their work through Doug, who was the executive director or whatever. And we don't have all of it, but we'll get some of it. And so we'll be talking more about that, because in order for us to have that relationship with our team members, we really do need to know ourselves. And we also do need to self-manage more, not just emotional regulation in the form of EQ, about not getting upset when somebody fails us too bad or, going off the handle on them and the rest of that stuff. But we've got to obviously manage our own technology now, our own security, our own time, and a blended time too that isn't about balance, but it's about integration. It really isn't about life-work balance anymore. It's more about life-work integration. And how do we make it work in the amount of time we have so I can get to the dentist, get to the doctor, look after the kids, spend time playing baseball, sit down and do arts, whatever it might be. But that's equally important now as the work, and organizations need to clearly recognize that a little bit more. Well, a lot of the things we've talked about have been about creating the conditions, because this whole webinar is really kind of focused on that. But there's a huge list I've got for that too, which is 3 parts. So what I'm going to do in this part here instead is, again, give you a minute to read while I'm looking at this. And a couple of these we've already talked about, like OKRs, getting autonomy via the policies, clarifying expectations, clarifying roles, changing our hiring and onboarding experiences, and the use of assessments so that we can actually check in with each other. Now, the assessment thing, there's a lot of differing opinions on it. Some people like it, some people don't. The Myers-Briggs stuff, either it's kind of cool or it's kind of shit, and I understand why people feel differently about it. But overall, the ability to understand where we stand on the same issues, particularly with each other on a team, is very important. And when I've deployed, so Rallybright is a partner of ours, and professional members get a free membership or free profile with Rallybright. It's an assessment tool. He has a couple of different assessments. I'm not going to pitch the whole thing, but I worked with him for about a year trying to build out the ecosystem, which of course is in part which led to me thinking about this TeamFlow Institute and how we can do that, and also part of why I've brought him into it, because the tool was phenomenal. And I delivered a couple of workshops using the tools, and what I found was mind-blowing. We were able to create a safe space in this executive leadership team where there were issues that were 9 months old and not surfaced, that were able to come up through the language of the test and the assessment. Because the assessment not only created the ability for us to talk about these specific issues that matter, it also created the ability for us to have the language to talk about it in a way that was non-confrontational and non-threatening. And so people were able to discuss some of these issues in a much more positive way and actually get through a resolution of really petty stuff. And it was just mind-blowing in terms of how it worked. But of course, this all comes back to a higher level of holistic approach. We can't do all of this. We've got to choose the things that are most important for the work and for the people that we have. But that assessment thing, I think, is really core for a lot of organizations who really want to go into this and get to that deeper potential of the team and the people that they're working with. And that really means we have to intentionally design our employee experience. We have to actually think about the whole of that experience. And things like facilitating social connectings, rethinking how we actually work and working out loud instead of in emails and DMs. How do we work into those semi-public collaborative spaces And then how do we continuously realign on priorities on top of that? Crazy, hard, difficult thing, but we need to take the time, particularly in remote or distributed teams where we don't see each other regularly, and have those hallway conversations, which is probably the only thing out of working in an office I really miss, because those corporate drive-bys, bumping into somebody, is where a lot of things happen for me over the years. And not getting that kind of sucks. But what we need to do is set up those situations in which that can still happen. And so that means outside of the work meetings, we have other social connections. And of course, there's a huge bunch of them, from comedy clubs to learning how to mix drinks. My wife was doing a remote team exercise with graffiti. So they all did graffiti and learned graffiti from this top graffiti artist, which was crazy. So there's a lot of other components to it. The other thing that I really hit on in doing the Align software that I want to move forward broadly as a principle is balancing the asking and tasking. Now, we have AI to send a lot of our tasks to, so that's kind of changing that a little bit. But when we were talking about it, we were again looking at more the relationship and the safety and the trust level, and also a recognition that in large organizations in particular, an individual can have a responsibility to somebody at another team, another SVP, or an SVP could ask something of me, and I'm booked 120%. So, but instead, the power dynamics of traditional organizations makes me believe that if I don't meet his needs and my boss's needs and my team's needs, I'm going to get fired or something bad's going to happen, right? So the best way to avoid that is with a system of OKRs or elsewhere where people can see, oh, these are all the things this person's responsible for. Hear who they are responsible to. They don't have the load, or what I have really is more important than this work, and I need to talk to the person they're responsible to before I talk to them about getting that work done. So just literally that story of what I just described could save days or weeks of time of going through me being told by the SVP wants something. Then I didn't even include all the negative energy and the bad feelings and the pain and the health issues that can come from that we've all seen with other friends of ours or workers who have burned out, and burned out typically probably do a very similar situation to that story. And then, of course, there's a ton more. So again, I'm going to pause here because I just went through two. Is there anything here, Denise, that you'd like me to go further into? And of course, we're going to do this over the next couple of months. So all of it we're going to go into, but right now.
Yeah, I'm okay now, Chris. Thanks.
Thank you. And then, leverage automating technology. What I really am looking at and what we've been leaning on in these early stages is the end of meetings as usual. And that's where actually we've been exploring different designs and researching around how might we turn meetings into collaborative conversations that are both synchronous, real time like this, and asynchronous a la Slack or Asana or any of these other tools where we're working in different time zones or just continuing to move things along in our own independent working time. And we've got a whole meeting, actually last year with the Waymakers group, we developed a Meeting Zen handbook that addresses a lot of different little ways we can do this. But again, some of the more basic ones, set an agenda before anyone shows up, make sure it's only the people who really need to be there. If we use AI transcription software, like we're doing here, well, actually I'm not right now, I'm recording to Zoom and then I'll port it all over. Thank God, because I just freaked out that it wasn't recording. It did ask you to record at the beginning, right? Yeah, okay, good. Whew. Oh my gosh, I just got freaked out all bad. So that we can have that set up in advance, and then also again that we end on time, which is where I'm rushing even a little bit more because I want to respect your time and end on time here. And then there's two other elements of this that we really think are important. Both Jamie and myself came from these backgrounds and really looked at it, which is the addition of gratitude protocols and how we express sincere gratitude, not forced gratitude with each other, and the ongoing acknowledgement of contributions and of stellar performance, or really recognizing when somebody delivers something in an exceptional manner. And then, of course, more broadly, as we're looking at it, the organization's focus on well-being, creating that win-win-win environment, and really helping the individual grow to their greatest potential through education programs, through executive coaches or personal coaches. My wife's company even has a group coach for all of their managers that is teaching them all at once how to actually better manage your teams. And each week they go through a different issue. I'm expecting we're going to have a program similar to that that addresses all these elements of facilitating team flow. And finally, and more broadly, the holistic part of this is the effort to create the conditions starts with a cultural plan at an organizational scale. The effort starts at an individual or team level by simple actions, but organizations typically believe they have a strategic plan. Most have an operational plan. They typically don't have a culture plan to express how strategy and operations comes together with the humans inside the organization to actually produce the value and create the vision that is set for the company. And I'm just going to hit on this briefly, and you can have access to this deck after the presentation. And of course, you'll have the transcript, the blog post, and this video to refer back to. But I really lean on Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. And what we realized is a similar sort of thing is really necessary for organizational flow to occur. And that is a culture plan that starts with why, the mission, vision, values, that goes into how, the workflows and workspaces we use, the what, the strategy and objectives, and then adding on the who, our work agreements and relationships with the other people on our teams, our relationship to the mission, vision, values of the organization, and more importantly, the organization's relationship with us and how much they take care of us. There's a lot more to do, and I've got to figure out how to break that out a little bit better. I think perhaps my live filtering of which points might be a good indicator of how to prioritize and develop this, so that was actually useful. Apologies for putting the smorgasbord of text in front of you, but also, again, I'd love your feedback on any of it or questions on any of it. We have a free community member. There's also a professional member. Don't worry about that. You can join as a free community member now. And join us, and we'll be offering the course right after Labor Day. I've got a big Labor Day campaign plan, and we'll be doing that. And then, try to figure out how to get to your own flow. Try to find personal experiments that you can do to do this, or ask, because there's a few suggestions we can make for how to get there and what to do. And with that, thank you very much for listening to my very speedy and long presentation here today. I appreciate you coming out and being a part of this. Honestly, although it's just the two of you here, if you didn't show up, I couldn't have delivered this as well. And not that it was great, but I am very grateful that you're here to be an audience, to listen to me and be an engaged listener, to be able to share this with you.
Chris, it was great. There's so much good here. I look forward to learning more. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome, Denise. Thank you very much. And it's top of the hour, so
Yep.
Have a great one.
You
Take
too.
care,
Bye-bye.
Karen. Thanks for saying hi. Bye. For everyone else out there in the web, I appreciate you very much, and I hope that you join us and become a free member of the TeamFlow Institute. Just go to teamflow.institute/community, and the options are right there on that page. Of course, check out our blog, and if you found this recording on our blog, please check out our prior webinars and sign up for some of our future ones, and it would be great to meet with you. Have a great day, and we'll speak to you more soon.